Welcome, friend, to this peaceful journey through the sands of time. We will explore one of history's most fascinating and controversial rulers. Tonight, we are traveling back over 3,000 years to ancient Egypt. A young pharaoh would shake the very foundations of the world's greatest civilization. Whether you are settling in for the night or simply seeking a moment of calm, I am grateful you are here with me. This is a soothing exploration of Akhenaten and his revolutionary reign. It would forever change Egypt. If these gentle historical narratives help you find peace, consider subscribing for more stories. They bridge the ancient and modern worlds. Now, let me take you back to a time when the Nile ran golden under Ra's eternal gaze. The greatest empire on earth was about to face its most radical transformation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the limestone corridors of the royal palace in Thebes. A young prince named Amenhotep stirred from his sleep. The year was approximately 1380 BC. Egypt stood at the absolute pinnacle of its power and prosperity. The 18th dynasty had transformed the land of the pharaohs into an empire. It stretched from Nubia in the south to the Euphrates River in the north. It commanded tribute from vassal kingdoms. It struck fear into the hearts of foreign rulers. Prince Amenhotep, who would one day become the heretic King Akhenaten, began each day much like any other member of the royal family. Servants dressed him in the finest linen. Their movements were precise and reverent. They prepared the future pharaoh for another day in paradise. The palace bustled with activity. Hundreds of courtiers, scribes, and attendants went about their carefully choreographed routines. Each person played their small part. They maintained the divine order that had governed Egypt for over a millennium. As the prince walked through the painted halls, adorned with scenes of his ancestors' triumphs, he passed walls that told the story of Egyptian supremacy. Here, his great-grandfather Thutmose III was depicted receiving tribute from cowering foreign princes. There, his grandfather, Amenhotep II, was shown as a mighty warrior. He crushed Egypt's enemies beneath his chariot wheels. These images were not mere decoration. They were constant reminders of the divine mandate. It flowed through royal blood. It connected each pharaoh to the gods themselves. The young prince's education began before dawn each day. Chambers filled with papyrus scrolls and wooden writing boards. His tutors were learned priests from the temple of Amun. They guided him through the complex hieroglyphic texts. These texts would prepare him for rulership. He studied mathematics. He learned to calculate the grain yields that fed millions. He learned about the tribute that flowed from conquered territories. Geography lessons taught him about the extent of Egyptian influence. It stretched from the gold mines of Nubia to the cedar forests of Lebanon. But perhaps most importantly, young Amenhotep learned about the gods. Egyptian religion was not a simple matter of faith. It was a complex system. It governed every aspect of life. It spanned from the flooding of the Nile to the movement of the stars. The pantheon included hundreds of deities. Each had specific roles and responsibilities. Ra, the sun god, sailed across the sky in his solar bark each day. He battled the forces of chaos. He ensured the world's continued existence. Amun, the hidden one, had become fused with Ra. This created Amun-Ra. He was the king of the gods. He was the deity most closely associated with pharaonic power. The priests taught the prince that he was the living embodiment of Horus, the falcon god. Upon his death, he would become one with Osiris. Osiris was the ruler of the underworld. This was not metaphorical. It was literal truth. This was as far as Egyptian theology was concerned. The pharaoh was a god walking among mortals. He was the crucial link between the divine realm and the earthly kingdom. He maintained cosmic order. As morning turned to afternoon, Prince Amenhotep would often find himself in the palace workshops. He observed the skilled artisans. They created the beautiful objects that filled royal residences. Master sculptors carved intricate statues from granite and limestone. Their chisels brought life to stone. They used techniques passed down through generations. Goldsmiths worked precious metals into elaborate jewelry and ceremonial objects. Painters mixed pigments to create the vibrant colors. These decorated tomb walls and temple chambers. These workshops were not merely centers of artistic creation. They were vital components of Egypt's religious and political machinery. Every statue, every painting, every decorative object served a purpose. It reinforced the pharaoh's divine nature and Egypt's eternal stability. The rigid artistic conventions that governed these works had remained virtually unchanged for centuries. They created a visual language. It proclaimed the unchanging nature of Egyptian civilization. The prince learned to read this visual language fluently. He understood that when a pharaoh was depicted with the blue crown, it signified his role as a military commander. The double crown represented his dominion over both Upper and Lower Egypt. The crook and flail in his hands symbolized his roles as shepherd and harvester of his people. These were not arbitrary symbols. They were sacred icons. They connected the earthly ruler to cosmic forces beyond human comprehension. Evenings in the palace were times of great ceremony and pageantry. The royal family would gather in the Great Hall. Elaborate feasts demonstrated Egypt's incredible wealth and sophistication. Tables groaned under the weight of exotic delicacies. These were brought from across the empire. Nubian gold vessels held wine from the finest vineyards. Servants offered dishes prepared with spices from distant lands. Musicians played haunting melodies on harps and flutes. Dancers moved with fluid grace. Their performances told ancient stories of gods and heroes. During these gatherings, Prince Amenhotep observed the complex protocols. These governed royal interaction. Foreign ambassadors presented tribute with elaborate ceremonies of submission. They prostrated themselves before the divine pharaoh. Egyptian nobles competed for royal attention. They displayed wealth and loyalty. Their every gesture was carefully calculated. It maintained or improved their standing at court. The prince noticed how his father, Amenhotep III, seemed to effortlessly command this elaborate social machinery. The king's every word was received as divine pronouncement. His slightest gesture was interpreted. It was acted upon by dozens of attendants. Yet the prince also observed subtle tensions. These existed beneath the surface of royal grandeur. Priests whispered among themselves about theological matters. Their discussions touched on questions. These seemed to trouble the young prince's developing mind. As night fell over the palace, Prince Amenhotep would often retreat to his private chambers. He contemplated the day's lessons and observations. The walls of his room were painted with traditional scenes of the afterlife. These showed the soul's journey through the underworld. They depicted its eventual resurrection in the presence of the gods. These images, which should have been comforting, sometimes seemed to trouble the young prince. He could not quite articulate why. He found himself questioning aspects of the religious system. Others accepted these without hesitation. Why were there so many gods? Surely divine power should be unified rather than divided. Why did the priests of different temples sometimes disagree about theological matters? They were all serving the same cosmic truth. Why did the elaborate rituals and offerings seem to benefit the priests more than the common people? The common people provided the wealth that supported them. These questions were not entirely unprecedented in Egyptian thought. Throughout the long history of the civilization, there had been periodic attempts to rationalize and simplify the complex religious system. Some pharaohs had elevated particular deities to positions of supreme importance. Others had emphasized the solar aspects of divinity. These seemed to unify different religious traditions. But no previous ruler had pursued such questioning to the radical conclusions. These would eventually emerge from Prince Amenhotep's developing theology. The palace library became one of the prince's favorite retreats during these contemplative periods. Here, surrounded by thousands of papyrus scrolls, he could study the wisdom of ages past. He explored ideas. These were not necessarily part of his formal education. Ancient texts spoke of the earliest dynasties. Pharaohs had been buried in simple mastaba tombs. Later, elaborate pyramids became symbols of royal power. Philosophical works discussed the nature of truth, justice, and cosmic order. These discussions sometimes challenged conventional understanding. One text particularly fascinated the young prince. It was the Great Hymn to the Aten. This composition praised the sun disk. It was the sole source of life and divine power. Unlike the complex theological systems that dominated contemporary religion, this hymn presented a remarkably simple and unified vision of divinity. The Aten was not just one god among many. It was the singular creative force. It brought all life into existence through its life-giving rays. The hymn described how the Aten's light awakened the world each morning. It brought plants to life. It inspired birds to sing. It filled human hearts with joy and energy. When the sun set each evening, the world fell into death-like stillness. Then the Aten brought renewed vitality. This cyclical pattern of death and rebirth seemed to the prince to capture something essential about the nature of existence. This was sometimes obscured by more complex theological formulations. As Prince Amenhotep matured into young adulthood, these intellectual and spiritual interests began to influence his participation in royal ceremonies and court life. He still performed his duties with appropriate dignity and reverence. But careful observers noted subtle differences in his approach to traditional practices. During religious festivals, he seemed particularly attentive to solar symbolism. He showed less enthusiasm for rituals dedicated to other deities. His father, Amenhotep III, was entering the twilight of his long and prosperous reign. The elder pharaoh had ruled for nearly 4 decades. He presided over an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity. This had allowed Egyptian culture to reach extraordinary heights of sophistication. Under his rule, Egypt had become the undisputed superpower of the ancient world. Its influence extended far beyond its borders. It used diplomatic alliances, economic partnerships, and cultural exchanges. Yet this very success may have contributed to the spiritual restlessness. This was developing in his son and heir. When survival and expansion were constant concerns, there was little time for theological speculation. But in an age of security and abundance, minds naturally turned to deeper questions about meaning and purpose. The prince found himself wondering whether Egypt's great achievements were truly as eternal and divinely ordained as traditional teaching suggested. The question of succession was becoming increasingly urgent. Amenhotep III's health began to show signs of decline. Court physicians did their best to maintain the king's vitality. They used elaborate medical treatments and magical rituals. But the passage of time was inexorable. Soon the young prince would need to assume the full responsibilities of pharaonic rule. He would take his place in the long line of god-kings. They had maintained Egypt's greatness for over a millennium. But the prince who would soon become Amenhotep IV and later transform himself into Akhenaten was already developing ideas. These would challenge everything his ancestors had built. The seeds of revolution were taking root in his mind. They were nourished by genuine spiritual seeking. Perhaps they were also nourished by a growing sense. The traditional system, for all its grandeur and success, was somehow incomplete. Perhaps it was even fundamentally flawed. The stage was being set for one of history's most dramatic religious and political upheavals. A young man prepared to abandon the wisdom of ages. He favored a radically new vision of divine truth and royal authority. The transformation began subtly. It was like the first whisper of wind that signals a coming storm. As Prince Amenhotep entered his 20th year, the court began to notice changes in his demeanor. These went beyond typical royal maturation. During morning audiences with foreign dignitaries, he would focus intently on the golden solar disk. It adorned the throne room ceiling. His gaze lingered there. This happened even as ambassadors presented their elaborate tributes and diplomatic messages. The prince's personal quarters underwent gradual but significant modifications during this period. Where once traditional images of Amun-Ra and other established deities had decorated his walls, new paintings began to appear. These featured the sun disk surrounded by rays. The rays ended in tiny hands. Each hand extended the Ankh, symbol of life, toward the earth below. These artistic changes were subtle enough. They avoided immediate controversy, but they represented the first visible signs of the theological revolution brewing in the young man's mind. His daily routine began to reflect these evolving spiritual convictions. Each morning, as the first rays of sunlight penetrated the palace windows, the prince would position himself. He could observe the sun's emergence over the eastern horizon. This was not the casual appreciation of natural beauty that might characterize any cultured person. This was rather an intense, almost mystical communion. He was beginning to understand it as the sole source of divine power and cosmic truth. The palace servants, trained to observe royal preferences with microscopic attention to detail, noted that the prince increasingly requested that his meals be served in courtyards and gardens. Natural sunlight could illuminate his food and drink there. He seemed to find particular satisfaction in breaking his fast as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky. It was as if drawing physical and spiritual nourishment simultaneously from earthly sustenance and celestial energy. These behavioral changes coincided with significant developments in the prince's intellectual life. His private library expanded. It included texts from various regions of the empire. Many of them explored philosophical and theological concepts. These differed markedly from traditional Egyptian religious thought. Scrolls from Mesopotamia discussed monotheistic tendencies in certain regional cults. Documents from the Levant explored the worship of solar deities. These bore striking similarities to the Aten concept. This was captivating the prince's imagination. The young royal's conversations with his tutors and advisors began to take on a distinctly different character during this formative period. Where once he had accepted traditional explanations of religious mysteries with appropriate reverence, he now posed increasingly challenging questions. These made even learned priests uncomfortable. Why, he wondered aloud, should divine power be fragmented among hundreds of different deities? The sun's life-giving energy seemed to demonstrate that all creative force emanated from a single source. His questioning extended beyond purely theological matters. It encompassed the social and political implications of religious belief. The prince observed that the complex pantheon of Egyptian gods required an enormous priestly bureaucracy. This maintained their various cults, temples, and rituals. Thousands of priests devoted their lives to serving different deities. They often did so in ways that seemed to compete with rather than complement each other. The resources devoted to maintaining this elaborate religious infrastructure were staggering. They involved vast quantities of gold, grain, livestock, and human labor. Meanwhile, the common people of Egypt ultimately provided the wealth. This supported both the royal court and the priestly establishment. They seemed to derive relatively little direct benefit from the complex theological system. They were required to support it through their taxes and labor. The prince began to envision a simpler, more direct relationship between divinity and humanity. This would eliminate unnecessary intermediaries. It would focus spiritual energy on the single source of all life and power. These revolutionary ideas remained largely private during the final years of Amenhotep III's reign, but they profoundly influenced the prince's preparation for eventual kingship. He began to surround himself with advisors and companions. They shared his interest in religious reform. He carefully selected individuals. These combined traditional Egyptian wisdom with openness to innovative theological concepts. Among these emerging confidants was a remarkable woman named Nefertiti. Her name meant, "The Beautiful One has come." She possessed not only extraordinary physical beauty, she also had an intellectual sophistication and spiritual sensitivity. These made her an ideal partner for the prince's revolutionary vision. Their courtship and marriage would prove to be far more than a typical royal alliance. It became instead a profound spiritual partnership. This would help reshape Egyptian civilization. Nefertiti brought her own insights and perspectives to the theological discussions. These increasingly dominated the prince's inner circle. Her understanding of the feminine aspects of divinity helped expand his conception of the Aten. It moved beyond purely masculine solar symbolism. It encompassed the nurturing, life-giving qualities traditionally associated with goddess figures in Egyptian religion. Together, they developed a theological framework. It honored both the power and the compassion of the singular divine force they believed governed all existence. The couple spent countless hours in gardens and courtyards. They observed the effects of sunlight on plants, animals, and human beings. They noticed how flowers turned to follow the sun's path across the sky. They saw how birds sang most joyfully during the bright hours of daylight. They observed how human faces seemed to glow with particular warmth and vitality. This happened when illuminated by natural solar radiance. These observations reinforced their growing conviction. The sun disk was indeed the visible manifestation of the supreme divine power. It created and sustained all life. As Amenhotep III's health continued to decline, court attention increasingly focused on the prince's readiness to assume full royal responsibilities. The traditional succession process required the heir to demonstrate mastery of various kingly arts. These included military leadership, diplomatic negotiation, religious ceremony, and administrative oversight. The prince performed adequately in all these areas, but careful observers noted that his heart seemed most engaged when dealing with matters. These touched on his evolving theological interests. During military exercises, for instance, he showed particular fascination with the strategic implications of timing attacks. These coincided with optimal solar conditions. His approach to diplomatic negotiations emphasized concepts of truth and cosmic order. These reflected his developing religious philosophy. Most significantly, his participation in traditional religious ceremonies began to subtly emphasize solar symbolism. He downplayed the roles of other deities in ways that suggested significant changes might be coming. The prince's artistic patronage during this period also reflected his evolving spiritual vision. He commissioned sculptors and painters to create works. These departed from traditional Egyptian artistic conventions. They favored more naturalistic representations of human figures and natural scenes. These artistic innovations were not merely aesthetic preferences. They expressed deeper theological convictions. These were about the importance of truth and authenticity in representing divine creation. Traditional Egyptian art had always emphasized eternal idealized forms. These symbolized the unchanging nature of cosmic order. Pharaohs were depicted according to strict conventions. These had remained virtually unchanged for centuries. Their bodies conformed to mathematical proportions. These reflected theological rather than anatomical truth. The prince began to encourage artists to observe and represent the natural world more directly. He believed that honest depiction of divine creation was more spiritually authentic. This was truer than adherence to artificial conventions. These artistic innovations extended to architectural projects as well. The prince began planning temple designs. These would maximize natural illumination. They created sacred spaces. Worshippers could experience direct connection with the Aten's life-giving rays there. Unlike traditional Egyptian temples, which were often dark, mysterious spaces designed to emphasize the hidden nature of divine power, these new structures would be open, bright, and welcoming. They reflected the prince's belief. Divine truth should be accessible to all people. It should not be hidden behind priestly mysteries. The intellectual and spiritual transformation occurring within the prince was paralleled by significant changes in the broader Egyptian society. The long peace and prosperity of Amenhotep III's reign had created conditions. These encouraged philosophical speculation and religious experimentation. Prosperity had freed many people from the immediate concerns of survival. This allowed them to contemplate deeper questions about meaning and purpose. International trade and diplomatic contact had exposed Egyptians to foreign ideas and practices. These challenged traditional assumptions about the unique superiority of their civilization. Some scholars and priests had begun to question. The complex religious system that had served Egypt for centuries was still adequate. This was for the challenges of a more cosmopolitan age. Foreign influences were subtly affecting Egyptian culture. This made some traditional practices seem provincial or outdated. The prince's revolutionary ideas, while still radical, were emerging in a cultural context. This was increasingly receptive to innovation and change. Yet, the forces of tradition remained enormously powerful throughout Egyptian society. The priestly establishments of major temples controlled vast wealth. They wielded significant political influence. This would not be easily challenged or displaced. Aristocratic families had built their identities and power structures. These were around the existing religious and political system. This made them natural opponents of any radical changes. The common people, while potentially benefiting from religious simplification, were deeply attached to traditional practices and beliefs. These had provided comfort and meaning for countless generations. The stage was thus set for an extraordinary transformation. It was a transformation that would shake the very foundations of the Nile kingdom. The long shadow of Amenhotep III's impending death hung heavy over the court. It signaled the dawn of a new era. The prince knew his moment was approaching. He prepared for it with quiet intensity. His father's last days were filled with ritual and lament. Priests chanted ancient spells. They sought to ensure the king's passage to the afterlife. The air in Thebes grew thick with incense and sorrow. Mourners wept openly in the streets. They honored a pharaoh who had brought them unparalleled peace. Yet, within the palace, a different kind of anticipation simmered. It was an anticipation of profound change. The old king, weary from decades of rule, finally succumbed to his ailments. His passing sent ripples across the empire. The entire land entered a period of official mourning. Royal funeral rites began. These were elaborate ceremonies. They had been perfected over millennia. The prince, now officially Amenhotep IV, participated dutifully in every solemn observance. He wore the traditional mourning attire. He uttered the prescribed prayers. His outward actions conformed to ancient expectations. But his inner world buzzed with revolutionary fervor. He stood poised on the brink of an unprecedented spiritual revolution. His coronation ceremony was a magnificent spectacle. It reaffirmed his divine right to rule. He was invested with the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Priests anointed him with sacred oils. Nobles bowed before him. Foreign ambassadors offered lavish gifts. They pledged their loyalty. The new pharaoh, Amenhotep IV, officially became the living embodiment of Horus. He was the protector of Ma'at, cosmic order, and justice. This moment traditionally cemented a pharaoh's place within the established religious and political framework. However, for Amenhotep IV, it marked the beginning of his deliberate deviation from that framework. His first official acts hinted at the coming storm. He issued decrees. They granted unprecedented patronage to the Aten, the solar disk. These decrees specified that new temples dedicated to the Aten should be constructed. These temples would emphasize open courtyards and direct sunlight. They dramatically contrasted with the dark, enclosed sanctuaries of Amun. This was a subtle but significant shift in royal religious policy. It did not yet directly challenge Amun's supremacy, but it elevated the Aten to a new prominence. The pharaoh's early artistic commissions further underscored his evolving vision. He instructed sculptors to depict him and Nefertiti in a more naturalistic style. Their forms were elongated. Their faces showed individual characteristics. These included fuller lips and softer lines. This was a radical departure from the rigid, idealized representations of previous pharaohs. These new depictions were not merely stylistic choices. They were theological statements. They suggested a deeper truth in natural, unvarnished reality. This realism extended to intimate family scenes. The royal couple was shown with their daughters. They embraced them with tenderness. They held them in casual poses. These images projected a warmer, more human image of Pharaoh. They challenged the traditional portrayal of the king as a remote, infallible deity. This artistic revolution was an integral part of Akhenaten's broader theological revolution. It aimed to bring divinity closer to humanity. It made it more relatable and accessible. The new pharaoh also began to host public festivals. These celebrated the Aten's life-giving power. These events were unlike the traditional religious ceremonies. They were largely performed by priests behind temple walls. These new festivals were open to all citizens. They featured dancing, music, and offerings of fruit and flowers directly under the sun's rays. These gatherings fostered a sense of community. They also directly exposed the common people to the pharaoh's new religious ideas. The Aten was not a hidden god. It was a radiant, visible force. It brought joy and nourishment to all. These early years of Amenhotep IV's reign were a period of testing the waters. The pharaoh gradually introduced his reforms. He carefully observed the reactions of the powerful Amun priesthood. He also watched the response of the court and the general populace. The Amun priests, initially, adopted a cautious stance. They were accustomed to pharaohs who favored certain deities. They often incorporated new cults into the existing pantheon. They saw the Aten's rise as potentially temporary. They believed it would eventually be absorbed into the broader Amun-Ra theology. But as the Aten's prominence continued to grow, their apprehension deepened. The construction of new Aten temples began to divert resources. These resources had traditionally flowed to Amun's massive complexes. The pharaoh's public festivals drew attention away from Amun's elaborate rituals. Whispers of discontent began to circulate among the priests. They perceived a growing threat to their established power and wealth. The pharaoh, however, remained undeterred. He was convinced of the divine truth of his vision. He understood the political implications of his actions, but he believed his spiritual mission transcended earthly concerns. He also had the unwavering support of Nefertiti. She played an increasingly prominent role in public life. She was often depicted alongside him. She participated in ceremonies. Her presence legitimized his reforms. She presented a united royal front. Her intelligence and charisma were invaluable assets. They helped him navigate the turbulent waters of religious change. The royal couple's influence began to extend beyond religious reforms. They also initiated administrative changes. These reflected their commitment to transparency and directness. The pharaoh appointed officials. They were loyal to his new vision. He bypassed traditional power structures. He challenged the entrenched bureaucracy. This further exacerbated tensions with the old guard. The court was becoming increasingly polarized. Factions formed around the traditionalists and the reformists. The stakes were growing higher with each passing year. Then came the dramatic break. In approximately the 5th year of his reign, Amenhotep IV undertook the most radical act of his life. He changed his name. He abandoned Amenhotep, which meant Amun is content. He adopted Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten or spirit of the Aten. This was not merely a personal choice. It was a profound theological declaration. It severed his connection to the Amun priesthood. It publicly proclaimed his unwavering devotion to the Aten as the sole supreme deity. This name change sent shockwaves throughout Egypt. It was an unprecedented act of defiance against millennia of tradition. A pharaoh had never before renounced the name of a major god. It signaled a complete and irrevocable break. Akhenaten was no longer content with merely elevating the Aten. He was actively rejecting the other gods. He began to systematically dismantle the cult of Amun. He ordered the closure of Amun's temples. He confiscated their immense wealth. He dismissed their priests from their powerful positions. The name of Amun was chiseled out from monuments. It was removed from temple walls. It was erased from sacred texts. This was a direct assault on the most powerful religious institution in Egypt. It challenged the very fabric of Egyptian society. Other major deities also suffered similar fates. Their names were systematically effaced. Their cults were suppressed. Akhenaten was not merely promoting a new god. He was enforcing strict monotheism. He declared the Aten the only god. This was a concept utterly alien to the polytheistic worldview of ancient Egypt. The capital city of Thebes, long the heart of Amun worship, became increasingly unsuitable for Akhenaten's new vision. He decided to build an entirely new city. It would be dedicated solely to the Aten. This new capital would be called Akhetaten. It meant horizon of the Aten. It would rise from the desert sands in Middle Egypt. It was a blank canvas. It was untouched by the legacies of the old gods. This ambitious project began with astonishing speed. Thousands of workers were mobilized. They quarried limestone. They transported building materials. They constructed temples and palaces. Akhetaten was designed as a living city. It was a hymn to the Aten. Its layout maximized exposure to the sun. It featured open-air temples without roofs. These allowed the sun's rays to fall directly on altars. The royal palace was also open and bright. It incorporated vast courtyards. It had large windows. These artistic and architectural innovations were not just aesthetic. They were theological. They embodied the pharaoh's belief in the direct, unmediated connection between humanity and the Aten. The royal family moved to Akhetaten. It officially became the new capital of Egypt. This physical relocation symbolized the complete break with the past. The pharaoh, Nefertiti, and their growing family now resided in a city entirely dedicated to their new faith. Daily life in Akhetaten revolved around the worship of the Aten. The pharaoh himself acted as the chief priest. He performed daily rituals. He made offerings directly to the sun disk. Nefertiti played a vital role in these ceremonies. She was often depicted as co-worshipper. Sometimes she was shown acting as a priestess in her own right. Their 6 daughters also participated. This reinforced the idea of a unified royal family. They were all devoted to the Aten. The city itself became a vibrant center for Akhenaten's artistic revolution. Sculptors and painters, freed from the rigid conventions of Thebes, experimented with new forms and themes. Naturalism flourished. Everyday life scenes became popular. Images of the royal family in intimate moments filled palace walls. These depicted love and joy. They were a stark contrast to the austere formality of traditional royal art. The great hymn to the Aten, which had so fascinated the young prince, became the central text of the new religion. It was carved on tomb walls in Akhetaten. It celebrated the Aten as the singular creator of all life. It praised its benevolence and its omnipotence. The hymn described the Aten's rays reaching down to earth. They nurtured plants. They warmed creatures. They brought forth human beings. It presented a worldview where all life depended directly on the sun's grace. It emphasized a universal, accessible divinity. However, this radical transformation did not occur without significant resistance. The Amun priesthood, though stripped of its power, harbored deep resentment. Many traditionalists viewed Akhenaten as a heretic. They saw him as a destroyer of sacred traditions. They believed his actions would incur the wrath of the gods. The common people, too, were deeply disturbed by the changes. Their lives were interwoven with the old gods. These deities offered protection and comfort. The abrupt removal of their familiar religious practices left many feeling spiritually adrift. The suppression of other cults meant that traditional funerary practices were also disrupted. Osiris, the god of the underworld and resurrection, was no longer officially recognized. This created profound anxiety about the afterlife. How could souls find their way to eternal bliss without Osiris? The Aten was a god of life, not of death. The pharaoh's new religion offered little comfort for those mourning their dead. This was a significant psychological impact on the populace. The international perception of Egypt also began to shift. Neighboring kingdoms had long respected Egypt's stability and divine order. They were now witnessing internal turmoil. Diplomatic letters from vassal states, preserved in the Amun letters, reveal growing concern. They detail pleas for aid. They describe incursions from nomadic tribes. They lament the pharaoh's apparent preoccupation with religious matters. These issues seemed to overshadow traditional foreign policy. Akhenaten's focus was almost entirely inward. He was consumed by his spiritual revolution. This shift in focus had tangible consequences. Egypt's influence abroad began to wane. Its imperial authority weakened. The traditional system of tribute and alliances, once meticulously maintained by pharaohs like Amenhotep III, started to unravel. The pharaoh's revolutionary fervor, while deeply personal and spiritually motivated, came at a considerable political and social cost. The seeds of future instability were sown during these years in Akhetaten. Akhenaten's reign was characterized by an unprecedented concentration of power in the hands of the royal family. The pharaoh, Nefertiti, and their daughters became the sole intermediaries between humanity and the Aten. There was no longer a vast priestly class. There were no elaborate rituals performed in hidden sanctuaries. Worship was direct. It was personal. It was led by the royal house. This reinforced the pharaoh's divine status. It also isolated him from traditional sources of counsel. Nefertiti's prominence during this period was remarkable. She was depicted almost as an equal to Akhenaten. She wore the pharaoh's crown. She struck down enemies. She even performed religious rituals traditionally reserved for kings. This unusual elevation of a queen underscored the revolutionary nature of the Amun period. It suggested a partnership that transcended conventional gender roles in ancient Egypt. Her beauty, immortalized in the famous bust now in Berlin, became a symbol of the Amun era's unique artistic and cultural flourishing. The royal couple's devotion to the Aten was absolute. They believed their actions were divinely inspired. They were necessary to bring cosmic truth to Egypt. Their spiritual quest was genuine. It was born from a deep-seated conviction. The old ways were flawed. They obstructed a purer understanding of divinity. They sought to purify Egypt's religious landscape. They desired to reveal the singular, benevolent force that animated the universe. However, the practicalities of governance suffered amidst this fervent spiritual pursuit. The administration of a vast empire required constant attention. It needed experienced officials. It demanded pragmatic decision-making. Akhenaten, absorbed in his theological reforms, seemed to lose touch with the day-to-day realities of ruling. He placed immense trust in a new class of loyal, but often inexperienced, administrators. These were men who owed their positions solely to the pharaoh. They lacked the traditional networks of power and influence. This created a disconnect between the central government in Akhetaten and the various provinces and vassal states. The common people continued to labor. They supported the state through their taxes and services, but they found themselves increasingly alienated from the radical changes unfolding around them. Their traditional festivals were banned. Their local deities were ridiculed. Their spiritual comfort was taken away. The new religion, focused on a distant sun disk and mediated solely by the royal family, felt remote and inaccessible to many. The economic implications of Akhenaten's reforms were also significant. The closure of major temples, particularly those of Amun, meant the disruption of vast economic networks. These temples were not just religious centers. They were also major landowners, employers, and treasuries. Their wealth had supported countless artisans, scribes, and laborists. Their sudden dismantling led to widespread economic hardship. It resulted in social unrest in many regions. The pharaoh's singular focus on the Aten did not allow for compromise. He did not permit syncretism. This had been a hallmark of Egyptian religion for millennia. He demanded absolute adherence to his monotheistic vision. This uncompromising stance further solidified opposition. It created an environment of fear and resentment. Many people secretly clung to their old gods. They performed private rituals. They hoped for a return to the familiar ways. The later years of Akhenaten's reign were marked by increasing isolation. He seemed to withdraw further into his city of Akhetaten. He relied exclusively on his inner circle of Atenist adherents. The outside world continued to face challenges. The Hittites to the north were growing in power. They threatened Egypt's Syrian possessions. The situation on the southern border with Nubia remained tenuous. Yet, Akhenaten appeared largely unresponsive. He was focused on his divine mission. The relationship between Akhenaten and Nefertiti also seemed to undergo changes during this period. While they were still frequently depicted together, some scholars suggest a possible shift in their public roles. Nefertiti may have taken on increased administrative responsibilities. This was due to Akhenaten's waning interest in secular governance. Her image in later reliefs shows her with greater authority. She possibly even ruled independently for a short time. This remains a subject of intense debate among Egyptologists. The succession question again loomed large. Akhenaten had no surviving sons from Nefertiti. His male heir would eventually be Tutankhaten, a younger son by a secondary wife, Kia. This young prince would one day reverse his father's revolution. He would restore the old gods. But for now, the Atenist experiment continued. It was a bold, solitary journey into uncharted religious territory. It defied all historical precedent. Akhenaten's legacy was already being written in the stones of Akhetaten. It was etched into the hearts of his followers. It was also simmering in the resentment of his enemies. The full consequences of his radical vision would only become clear after his death. The forces he unleashed, both spiritual and political, would reshape Egypt. They would leave an indelible mark on its long history. His final years were lived amidst the quiet triumph of his spiritual conviction. They were also lived amidst the growing cracks in his earthly empire. The once unshakable foundations of Egypt had been profoundly disturbed. The future remained uncertain. It hovered between radical reform and inevitable reaction. The stage was set for the last act of this extraordinary drama. Akhenaten's health began to fail. The pharaoh, still in his late 30s, had spent nearly 2 decades pursuing his singular vision. His body, depicted with an unusual, almost emaciated form in later artwork, seemed to reflect the immense spiritual and physical toll of his reign. Nefertiti, once his radiant co-ruler, seemed to vanish from the historical record around this time. Her fate remains one of Egypt's enduring mysteries. Some scholars believe she died. Others suggest she adopted a new name and ruled as a pharaoh in her own right. The truth is lost to time. Akhenaten, isolated within Akhetaten, continued his daily communion with the Aten. He believed his spiritual mission was nearing its completion. He envisioned an Egypt forever unified under the sun disk. But outside the city walls, the old gods stirred. Their silent resentment gathered strength. The Amun priests, stripped of their power but never truly vanquished, waited patiently. They knew the cycle of pharaohs. They understood the ephemeral nature of even the most radical reforms. They trusted that tradition, deeply rooted in the Egyptian soul, would eventually reclaim its dominion. The end came quietly for Akhenaten. He passed away in his new city, the horizon of the Aten. His death, around 1336 BCE, was not marked by the elaborate funerary rites of his ancestors. The Atenist religion offered no complex journey through the underworld. It promised direct union with the sun disk upon death. His burial place was likely a simple tomb in the cliffs surrounding Akhetaten. It stood in stark contrast to the grand valley of kings where other pharaohs rested. His passing was perhaps met with relief by many. It was a moment of profound uncertainty for the remaining Atenist loyalists. The empire was left without its revolutionary leader. The succession was unclear. A young prince, Tutankhaten, Akhenaten's son by a lesser wife, Kia, was still a child. He was too young to rule alone. A power vacuum emerged. It threatened to plunge Egypt into chaos. The powerful figures of the old guard saw their opportunity. Hormheb, a formidable general, had patiently navigated the Amarna years. A high-ranking court official, had served Akhenaten but also maintained ties with traditionalists. These men, among others, would now shape Egypt's future. The immediate aftermath of Akhenaten's death was a period of delicate maneuvering. The Atenist court attempted to maintain the pharaoh's religious reforms. They knew this would be a difficult task. The child king, Tutankhaten, remained in Akhetaten. He presided over the Aten cult, but the momentum of the revolution had waned. It could not survive without its charismatic leader. The city of Akhetaten, once vibrant with new ideas, began to show signs of decline. Its citizens felt the absence of the divine pharaoh. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the pendulum began to swing back. The first decisive step towards restoration was taken by Tutankhaten himself, or more likely, by his regents. The young king changed his name. He became Tutankhamen. This new name meant living image of Amun. It was a powerful public declaration. It signaled the return to traditional worship. This single act resonated throughout Egypt. It was a clear rejection of his father's monotheistic vision. The queen, his young wife Akhetaten, also changed her name. She became Akhetaten. Her name now honored Amun. The royal family publicly embraced the old gods. This provided a crucial symbol of reconciliation for the populace. The change of names was followed by concrete actions. The royal court abandoned Akhetaten. They returned to the traditional capital of Thebes. This was Amun's ancient seat of power. The city of Akhetaten, once a monument to a revolutionary faith, was left to the desert winds. It gradually faded into obscurity. The old temples were reopened. Their priests were reinstated. The cult of Amun was revived with renewed vigor. Vast resources were poured into repairing the damage. These resources included the effacement of Amun's name. They also included the restoration of the shattered statues of the old gods. This comprehensive program of religious restoration aimed to erase all traces of Akhenaten's reign. It sought to restore cosmic order. It brought back the favor of the angered gods. The young Tutankhamun, under the guidance of his powerful advisors, issued the Restoration Stela. This important document officially condemned Akhenaten's actions. It described the chaos and suffering that had befallen Egypt during the Amarna period. It blamed these misfortunes on the neglect of the true gods. The stela proclaimed Tutankhamun's devotion to Amun. It promised to rebuild the temples. It would fill them with new wealth. It also pledged to restore the priests to their rightful positions. This was a calculated political move. It aimed to legitimize the new regime. It appeased the powerful Amun priesthood. It reassured a populace deeply attached to their ancient beliefs. The old gods were back. Their familiar rituals offered comfort. They brought a sense of stability after years of spiritual upheaval. Tutankhamun, despite his young age, became a powerful symbol of this restoration. He was the pharaoh who brought Egypt back to its true path. However, the legacy of Akhenaten proved difficult to fully eradicate. The artistic revolution he inspired still subtly influenced the new era. While monumental art returned to traditional conventions, a softer, more naturalistic touch remained in some reliefs. The ideals of truth and authenticity, though stripped of their radical theological implications, lingered in the minds of some artists. The memory of Akhenaten's bold vision, even if condemned, continued to resonate in the quieter corners of Egyptian thought. The period of Tutankhamun's reign was characterized by a careful balance between restoration and consolidation. The regents, particularly A and Hormheb, effectively governed the empire. They allowed the young king to focus on symbolic acts of piety. They rebuilt Egypt's diplomatic ties. They reasserted its authority abroad. Egypt slowly regained its strength. It once again projected power throughout the Near East. But the young king's health was frail. He died unexpectedly after only 9 years on the throne. His death, still a mystery today, paved the way for more changes. His tomb, later discovered almost intact, would become one of the greatest archaeological finds in history. It offered an unparalleled glimpse into the wealth and artistry of ancient Egypt. It also contained many objects still bearing traces of the Amarna style. These were repurposed or slightly altered. With Tutankhamun's death, the direct royal line of the 18th dynasty ended. A, the old courtier, briefly ascended to the throne. He married Tutankhamun's widow, Akhenaten. This was a desperate attempt to legitimize his rule. But his reign was short. He was an aging figure. His rule was merely a transitional phase. The real power lay with the general Hormheb. He had skillfully navigated the treacherous currents of the Amarna period. He emerged as the true strongman. Hormheb became pharaoh. He completed the work of restoration. He launched a full-scale campaign to erase Akhenaten from history. The names of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and Tutankhamun were systematically chiseled out of monuments. They were removed from official lists of kings. Akhenaten's city, Akhetaten, was systematically dismantled. Its stones were used for new construction in other cities. Its temples were defaced. Its images were destroyed. This was a deliberate act of damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. The aim was to make it seem as though Akhenaten had never existed. His revolutionary reign was to be forgotten. It was to be expunged from the collective memory of Egypt. The Amarna period became a black hole in Egyptian history. It was a time of heresy and chaos. It was best left unmentioned. Hormheb also enacted legal reforms. These aimed to curb the corruption that had proliferated during the Amarna period. He strengthened the power of the central administration. He reorganized the army. He restored order and stability to an empire shaken by internal strife. His reign marked the true end of the Amarna experiment. It solidified the return to traditional Egyptian values and beliefs. The 19th dynasty, which followed Hormheb, continued this work of historical erasure. Pharaohs like Seti I and Ramesses II built magnificent temples. They celebrated the old gods. They listed their royal ancestors. They conspicuously omitted Akhenaten and his immediate successors. The heretic king became a ghost. He was an unmentionable figure in the glorious annals of Egypt. Yet, despite these determined efforts, Akhenaten's legacy endured in subtle ways. The very act of erasing his name ensured its eventual rediscovery. Future generations of archaeologists would piece together the fragments of his story. They would unveil his revolutionary vision. His bold challenge to tradition would eventually re-emerge from the sands of time. The Amarna period would later be recognized as one of the most intellectually vibrant and artistically innovative eras in Egyptian history. The suppression of Akhenaten's memory was so thorough that for millennia, he remained largely unknown. His city was lost. His ideas were forgotten. Only tantalizing hints in damaged inscriptions hinted at a pharaoh who dared to defy the gods. This mystery itself would become a powerful force. It drew modern scholars and explorers into the desolate landscapes of Middle Egypt. They searched for clues to the vanished king. The discovery of Akhetaten, later known as Amarna, in the 18th century, began the slow process of revelation. French and British explorers meticulously excavated the ruins. They uncovered the unique art and architecture of Akhenaten's city. They found the discarded stones of temples. They revealed the surprising naturalism of Amarna sculpture. The initial findings perplexed archaeologists. They did not fit the established understanding of Egyptian art and religion. The discovery of the Amarna letters in 1887 was another critical breakthrough. These clay tablets, written in Akkadian, were diplomatic correspondence between Egyptian pharaohs and foreign rulers. They offered a rare glimpse into Egypt's international relations during the late 18th dynasty. Many of these letters were addressed to the king of Egypt, but their content clearly indicated a period of internal turmoil and shifting priorities. They gradually revealed the political consequences of Akhenaten's religious revolution. Further archaeological work at Amarna uncovered more details about daily life in Akhenaten city. Homes of common citizens revealed simple altars for Aten worship. They depicted the royal family as intermediaries to the divine. The vast quantities of pottery and tools spoke of a bustling metropolis. It was a city entirely devoted to its unique faith. The workshops confirmed the artistic revolution. They contained unfinished sculptures in the distinctive Amarna style. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 was the most sensational event. Howard Carter's momentous find unveiled a treasure trove of artifacts. These included the famous golden burial mask. It captured the world's imagination. This tomb, though belonging to a pharaoh who had restored the old gods, still contained echoes of the Amarna period. Many objects showed stylistic influences of Akhenaten's reign. Some even bore the erased names of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. They revealed the hurried and incomplete nature of the historical erasure. The decipherment of hieroglyphs, made possible by the Rosetta Stone, allowed scholars to finally read the inscriptions. They could understand the detailed narratives of Akhenaten's reign. This academic effort painstakingly reconstructed the story of the heretic king. It pieced together the fragments of a deliberately suppressed past. The full scope of Akhenaten's religious revolution came into view. His radical monotheism, his artistic innovations, and his political struggles became clearer. The complex character of Akhenaten began to emerge. He was not merely a power-hungry tyrant. He was a deeply spiritual individual. He was convinced of a divine truth. He felt compelled to share it with his people. His devotion to the Aten was absolute. It shaped every aspect of his rule. He was a visionary. He was a reformer. He was also a figure whose unyielding convictions ultimately brought chaos. They almost destroyed the very civilization he sought to purify. His story resonated across time. It raised profound questions about the nature of faith, power, and human resistance to change. Was he a prophet ahead of his time? Was he a deluded zealot? His actions sparked debates among historians and theologians. They continue to discuss his motivations and his impact. The mystery of Akhenaten became a focal point for understanding ancient Egypt. It also became a lens for contemplating the broader human experience of spiritual transformation. The rediscovery of Akhenaten's story offered a unique perspective on the power of ideas. A single pharaoh, driven by an intense personal revelation, could challenge millennia of tradition. He could reshape an entire culture. Even if that revolution was ultimately reversed, its brief flourishing left an indelible mark. It proved that even in the most rigid societies, the human spirit could yearn for new truths. It could strive for a different understanding of the divine. The narrative of Akhenaten also served as a cautionary tale. It showed the dangers of imposing radical change without considering the social and psychological costs. His uncompromising monotheism alienated the priesthood. It confused the common people. It destabilized the empire. The return to polytheism after his death was not just a political reaction. It was also a popular demand for comfort and familiarity. It was a craving for the rich tapestry of beliefs that had sustained Egypt for so long. The figure of Nefertiti also captured the modern imagination. Her striking beauty and her prominent role in Akhenaten's reign made her one of the most famous queens of ancient Egypt. Her partnership with Akhenaten suggested a unique power dynamic. It challenged traditional gender roles. It added another layer of intrigue to the Amun period. Her disappearance from the historical record only deepened her mystique. The impact of Akhenaten's revolution, though short-lived, resonated beyond ancient Egypt. Some scholars have even speculated about its possible influence on the later development of monotheism in other cultures. Could the ideas of a singular, universal God have subtly spread from Egypt? This is a question that continues to spark scholarly debate. It highlights the enduring power of Akhenaten's unique spiritual experiment. The legacy of Akhenaten is thus complex and multifaceted. He was a pharaoh who dared to dream of a simpler, purer faith. He was a king whose revolution shook the foundations of his empire. He was a visionary who was erased from history, only to be rediscovered centuries later. His story serves as a reminder. Even the most powerful attempts to suppress truth cannot ultimately succeed. The past has a way of reasserting itself. His reign was a brief, blazing comet across the long night sky of Egyptian history. It burned brightly. It challenged the darkness. It left a lasting impression. It continues to fascinate and confound scholars and enthusiasts alike. The ruins of Akhetaten, now known as Amun, still stand under the relentless Egyptian sun. They are silent witnesses to a spiritual revolution. They are a monument to a pharaoh who dared to defy the gods. They are a testament to the enduring power of belief. The story of Akhenaten invites us to consider: what truly constitutes divine truth? How does humanity grapple with radical change? What are the ultimate costs of conviction? These are questions that remain as relevant today as they were over 3,000 years ago. His tale is not just ancient history. It is a timeless exploration of faith, power, and the human quest for meaning. It is a journey into the heart of a civilization. It was forever altered by one man's audacious vision. His final resting place remains a subject of ongoing archaeological investigation. The tomb originally prepared for him at Akhetaten was never fully used for his burial. Some theories suggest his mummy was later moved. It was perhaps secretly reburied elsewhere. This was an attempt to save it from the widespread destruction of his memory. The ultimate fate of Akhenaten's body, much like many aspects of his life, remained shrouded in enigma. The controversies surrounding his reign continued even after his death. The transition back to polytheism was not entirely smooth. The populace, having experienced a brief period of direct access to divinity through the Aten, may have found the renewed priestly intermediaries somewhat alienating. The power of the Amun priesthood, once restored, grew to unprecedented levels. This created new tensions within Egyptian society. The seeds of instability, though seemingly buried, continued to subtly influence subsequent dynasties. The very act of erasing Akhenaten from history created a historical gap. It obscured important lessons. It left later pharaohs grappling with some of the same challenges that Akhenaten had tried to address. The memory of the heretic king, though officially suppressed, lingered as a whispered warning. It was a silent testament to the fragility of even the most ancient traditions. The sheer scale of the damnatio memoriae against Akhenaten is remarkable. His name and images were not just erased. They were actively replaced by those of other pharaohs. This was done to obscure his very existence. This deliberate act of historical revisionism makes his eventual rediscovery even more astounding. It highlights the persistence of truth. It shows how it can emerge even from the deepest depths of suppression. The story of Akhenaten also underscores the profound influence of royal women in ancient Egypt. Nefertiti's partnership was crucial to his reign. Tutankhamun's mother, Kia, played a less direct but still significant role. The subsequent brief reign of Akhenaten after Tutankhamun's death further demonstrates their often overlooked agency. These women were not just passive figures. They were active participants in the unfolding drama. Akhenaten's artistic revolution, though largely reversed, left a lasting mark on subsequent Egyptian art. The naturalism he encouraged, the human touch in royal depictions, subtly seeped into the traditional style. Even after the full return to conservative norms, a certain softness, a hint of the Amun aesthetic, can be detected in later artworks. This was a testament to the enduring power of artistic innovation. His reign represents a singular moment in human history. It was a time when a king, armed with a deeply personal spiritual conviction, dared to challenge the very foundations of his world. He failed in his immediate goal. He was erased from history. Yet, in his rediscovery, he offered invaluable insights. He provided them into the human spirit's eternal quest for understanding and meaning. His story continues to unfold. His story continues to unfold. It reveals new facets with each archaeological discovery. The landscape around Akhetaten still holds secrets. They await patient hands to unearth them. Future generations will continue to debate Akhenaten's true nature. They will analyze his revolutionary impact. His legacy is not one of triumph but of profound questioning. It is a testament to the enduring human desire to define the divine. It is a powerful narrative of faith and rebellion. His story continues to unfold. It reveals new facets with each archaeological discovery. The landscape around Akhetaten still holds secrets. They await patient hands to unearth them. Future generations will continue to debate Akhenaten's true nature. They will analyze his revolutionary impact. His legacy is not one of triumph but of profound questioning. It is a testament to the enduring human desire to define the divine. It is a powerful narrative of faith and rebellion. The desert sands guard countless untold stories. They whisper tales of forgotten kings. Modern technology now aids in this tireless search. Ground-penetrating radar scans the ancient ground. Satellite imagery reveals subtle anomalies. These might indicate hidden structures. Drones fly silently over the sun-baked plains. They capture comprehensive views of the sprawling ruins. Every new artifact unearthed adds another piece. It slowly completes the puzzle of Akhenaten's reign. The work of Egyptologists never truly ends. They constantly refine their understanding. New theories emerge with fresh evidence. Old assumptions are challenged. The scientific community engages in lively debate. They discuss everything from Nefertiti's lineage to Akhenaten's true cause of death. Some scholars now question the traditional view. They suggest the damnatio memoriae was not entirely successful. They propose some elements of Atenism survived underground. Perhaps these influences subtly shaped later religious thought. These are intriguing possibilities. They add layers to Akhenaten's complex narrative. The enduring appeal of Akhenaten lies in his audacious originality. He was a pharaoh who refused to conform. He broke with a tradition spanning millennia. His courage or his madness continues to inspire debate. He stands as an eternal symbol of individual conviction. He challenged the collective dogma of his age. The sheer scale of the Amun experiment remains breathtaking. To abandon a capital, to build a new one, to overturn an entire religious system. These were acts of unimaginable boldness. The resources marshaled for Akhetaten's construction were immense. Thousands of workers toiled under the desert sun. They created a city in record time. This ambitious project required immense political will. It needed absolute devotion to a singular idea. The ruins of Akhetaten, now known as Amun, stretch across the desert floor. They bear silent witness to this ambition. The ghost of Akhenaten still walks among them. He silently surveys his fallen dream. The city's open temples speak of a god of light. They reflect a direct, unmediated relationship with the divine. This was a radical departure from the veiled mysteries of Amun's sanctuaries. The art of Amun also continues to captivate. Its distinctive style breaks free from rigid conventions. It celebrates natural beauty. It portrays human emotion. The elongated figures. The intimate family scenes. These elements create a powerful sense of connection. They show the royal family as relatable beings. This was unlike the aloof deities of traditional pharaonic art. Nefertiti's iconic bust embodies this new aesthetic. Her serene face, her regal bearing. They speak of a confident queen. She was an equal partner in a spiritual revolution. Her role in Akhenaten's reign was unparalleled. She was often depicted in scenes of worship. She stood alongside her husband. She played an active role in state ceremonies. This challenged established norms of royal female representation. The Amarna period represents a powerful historical what-if. What if Akhenaten's reforms had succeeded? How would Egyptian civilization have evolved? Would monotheism have taken root millennia earlier? The questions linger. They invite endless speculation. His failure was not a failure of faith. It was a failure of implementation. He imposed his vision too abruptly. He alienated too many powerful groups. He failed to consider the deep psychological needs of his people. The common Egyptians found solace in their myriad gods. They relied on specific deities for every aspect of life. Akhenaten's singular Aten could not replace this rich tapestry of belief. The afterlife, a central concern for Egyptians, was also neglected. The Aten was a god of life. It offered little guidance for the journey after death. The removal of Osiris caused profound spiritual anxiety. It left a void in the Egyptian worldview. This emotional and spiritual vacuum contributed significantly to the swift counter-revolution. The return to the old gods was not just a political restoration. It was a societal yearning for comfort. It was a return to spiritual equilibrium. The rediscovery of Akhenaten also forced a re-evaluation of Egyptian history. It shattered the long-held notion of an unchanging, static civilization. It revealed a period of intense intellectual and artistic ferment. It proved that ancient Egypt, for all its timeless grandeur, was capable of radical transformation. The Amarna period became a testament to the dynamic nature of human belief systems. It showed their capacity for both profound innovation and fierce conservatism. Scholars continue to analyze the economic impact of Akhenaten's reforms. The dismantling of temple economies caused massive disruption. Trade routes were affected. Provincial administrations weakened. The vast wealth previously controlled by Amun's priests was redirected. This created new financial centers. It caused widespread instability. The geopolitical consequences were also severe. Egypt's withdrawal from international affairs allowed rival powers to gain strength. The Hittites expanded their empire. Canaanite city-states appealed in vain for Egyptian aid. The Amarna letters vividly illustrate this decline. They show a pharaoh seemingly deaf to the cries of his vassals. His focus was entirely on his internal spiritual quest. The ultimate irony of Akhenaten's story is his erasure. A pharaoh who sought to bring ultimate truth to his people. He was then deliberately struck from the record. His name was chiseled out. His images were destroyed. His city was razed. This was a systematic attempt to deny his very existence. Yet, this very act of suppression ensured his eventual, spectacular re-emergence. The deeper the burial, the more dramatic the discovery. Akhenaten's story is a triumph of archaeological persistence. It is a testament to the enduring human desire to uncover hidden truths. His legacy is not just historical. It is philosophical. It forces us to confront the nature of divine authority. It asks about the relationship between political power and spiritual conviction. It probes the boundaries of tradition and innovation. These questions remain profoundly relevant in our own time. They continue to shape human societies. The mysterious end of Nefertiti continues to tantalize researchers. Did she die of natural causes? Was she exiled? Did she rule as a pharaoh herself? The evidence is scarce. It is open to multiple interpretations. Her disappearance from public view marks a significant turning point in Akhenaten's reign. It coincides with the pharaoh's increasing isolation. It suggests a possible shift in the internal dynamics of the Amarna court. The discovery of her actual tomb would be a monumental event. It would undoubtedly shed more light on the entire Amarna period. It would add another chapter to this captivating tale. Akhenaten's personal convictions were unshakable. He believed he was fulfilling a divine mandate. His vision was not born of political ambition. It arose from a genuine spiritual awakening. This sincerity makes his story all the more compelling. It elevates him beyond a mere historical figure. He becomes a symbol of ultimate devotion. He represents profound spiritual struggle. His story resonates across cultures and centuries. It speaks to anyone who has ever questioned established norms. It inspires those who have dared to dream of a different world. Akhenaten was a pioneer. He was a trailblazer. He journeyed into uncharted spiritual territory. He was ultimately undone by the very forces he sought to overcome. The sand-swept ruins of Amarna stand as his enduring monument. They are a silent witness to a revolutionary spirit. They are a testament to the ephemeral nature of earthly power. They are a reminder of the lasting impact of profound ideas. The sun continues its daily journey across the Egyptian sky. It shines down on the remnants of Akhetaten. Its rays illuminate the empty altars. They once held offerings to the Aten. The enduring mystery of Akhenaten beckons. It invites us to delve deeper. It urges us to understand his audacious vision. It compels us to consider the echoes of his revolution. They still reverberate across the vast expanse of human history. His name, once erased, now shines brighter than ever. It is a beacon of intellectual curiosity. It is a symbol of spiritual quest. It is an eternal enigma,